It's a pleasure to work with OSA, certainly when I was in Congress, but now as the head of the AAAS. I've worked with Liz closely. She's a great colleague, Laura in government affairs, and so the relationship is important. AAAS, as you heard, is the largest general science membership organization. There are some larger member organizations, but AAAS for 170 years has been, I would argue, the essential society that bridges all the disciplines, and we've been at critical points in the history of science and engineering and technology. We advocated for the formation of the U.S. Forest Service. Members of the AAAS provided the critical funding for the ACLU's defense of John Scopes in the Scopes evolution trials. AAAS convened the meetings where Vannevar Bush's book that was the basis for the National Science Foundation was actually turned into explicit plans for what became the National Science Foundation. AAAS convened meetings more than 50 years ago about the risk of human-induced climate change and worked with the then White House science advisors to issue a warning signed by President Lyndon Johnson that the climate appeared to be changing in dangerous ways because of human activity. We've had an important convening role, and that's coming to the fore right now. Now, you heard a little bit about my background. I'm a scientist at heart, but from my earliest memories, I've been interested in how the world works, that's science, and how people get along, that's politics. In the 7th grade, I had my own subscription to Scientific American and the Washington Post. And so it's not surprising that I've straddled these worlds, but it really was the AAAS Congressional Fellowship that was so important in my understanding of these things. And for now 4 decades, AAAS and a number of other societies, including the OSA, have, this year, 250 PhD level scientists and engineers in all 3 branches of the federal government. It is a great program. It brings technical expertise to the government. It also brings political savvy back to the professions. And maybe as important as anything else, it has changed people's idea of what is a respectable career for a PhD, beyond just following your doctoral advisor. That led me to 16 years, not directly. I went back to academic teaching, although I did change some of in addition to the full range of physics courses, I began teaching some public policy and other things. And then worked at the State Department and so forth. But after 16 years in the Congress, where I deliberately did not sit on the Science Committee, because I wanted to be around in all of these other places where science is found but not recognized. Just about yesterday when I was testifying before the House Science Committee, I commented that we at AAAS had written to every cabinet nominee. And I said, you understand, of course, that you will be heading up a science agency. Yes, the Attorney General, yes, the Housing and Urban Development, pointing out that, well, the Attorney General would do well to understand forensic science better than, so that the Justice Department can use that better than they have been using it. The Secretary of Housing would do well to understand social science research that could really help him in his decisions, and so forth. And so in Congress, I spent a lot of time trying to draw people's attention to where science was embedded in apparently unscientific policy matters. After 16 years, I asked myself, well, under what conditions does a person leave Congress? In fact, after I had left Congress, I was standing around chatting with some former governors of New Jersey at standing around before a ceremonial dinner or something. And they were asking why I left Congress, and I said, well, you could leave in three ways. You could be voted out, you could die in office, or you could decide to leave, and that third option was much more appealing. So after 16 years, I decided to step aside, and then the job from AAAS came along. But one of the governors said, well, actually, Russ, you're wrong. There's a fourth way. And I said, oh? He said, well, you could go to jail. And I said, only a governor from New Jersey would say that. To which they said, no, Illinois also. But it's been an exciting time at AAAS. We have, in addition to the 100,000 members around the world, and I hope all of you, we have more than 250 affiliate societies. And so this convening role that we have, not always used constructively. I mean, we generally ignore the affiliate societies, and they generally ignore us, and I'm changing that. Liz and I and 20 other society CEOs that used to meet, every 4 to 6 months, are now meeting almost weekly to talk about where we find ourselves, where science, engineering, technology find themselves now. And we at AAAS are trying to play a constructive leadership role, convening these societies. Last week, for example, we shepherded a letter signed by 180, I think it is now, societies, universities, professional societies, and so forth. A letter to the president saying that the travel ban should be rescinded because from our point of view, of what it does to collaborations, meeting attendance, and so forth for the societies, in addition to humanitarian, political, diplomatic concerns. It's the largest sign-on letter that I've seen with really, as I say, 175 or 180 very different scientific societies. We have a website that we keep up with first transition period and now the first 100 or 200 days of this administration. And we're doing all of this because our members and members of these affiliated societies are demanding it. I've never seen in now my rather long career the level of not just uncertainty, but anxiety. There's always uncertainty at the time of a presidential transition, although this president delights in creating. I mean, he says he's just carrying out what he said he would do, but we all know he delights in confounding people and surprising people. And so there is that uncertainty, but the level of uncertainty is so high it becomes anxiety. And in fact, as you heard from Matt, you have to look pretty hard to see any mention of science, any nod toward science, any discussion of science, engineering, technology coming from the White House or the influential team, the transition team, and so forth. And you can point to only, I'd say, 1.5 appointments that are nominally or explicitly science. Francis Collins has been asked to stay on as the head of the National Institutes of Health, and there's a federal communications appointment, which is sort of half technical. Matt mentioned Franz Cordova, but Franz Cordova was already on in a term job, didn't have to leave, didn't choose to leave, and the president didn't make her leave, and so I don't really count that. So the question is, are things as bad as scientists think they are? It is mostly silence, which is, of course, troubling in itself, but I think it's a very ominous silence. It seems to me to represent a deep misunderstanding and even mistrust of what we do. Misunderstanding in the sense that they think, I believe, that we are just another interest group and not a very powerful one at that. And mistrust in the sense that they think we come along with liberal pronouncements without any understanding of how we arrive at our positions, at our understanding. They don't understand that science is this marvelous invention for dealing with things we don't know and arriving at reliable knowledge. But the Trump administration is not special in that respect. I've been saying that for several decades, there has been an eroding appreciation of science. If you ask in an opinion poll, do you value science? 90%, oh yeah, it's great, I love it. It's terrific. It's whatever. If you ask, well, what does science need to thrive? Or if you ask, what is the essence of science? What's so special about science? Why are science advisory positions important? Why should the president have a science advisor? Is it only to represent that interest group? I hope not. In fact, we've tried to make it clear to the president that he needs a science advisor now, not to represent scientists, but to help him be ready for next month's crisis. There will be a crisis next month, you can count on it. But you don't know where it's going to be, whether it's an emerging disease or an oil well blowout. It's better not to get up to speed then. That's what we're trying to say. But it is not just the president that I think has this problem of misunderstanding and mistrust of science. So that brings us to where we all are now. What should we be doing? One quick detour. With respect to Congress, and I mentioned I was testifying before Lamar Smith's committee yesterday. That's interesting. Matt would understand. That it was ostensibly about the EPA, but it was about all sorts of things, and of course the chairman's principal interest was climate change and what a conspiracy climate science is. But I was reminded yesterday, what I have observed now for a few months, is that Congress is still Congress. Congress appropriators will tell you, no, the president doesn't make the appropriations, we make the appropriations. They will say, well, the president proposes policy and he can make some executive orders and executive decisions, but we make the policy. And that's still true. It is dysfunctional in recent years and shows every sign of being as dysfunctional now. There is some suggestion that with the new energy in the White House, there will be new energy and direction in the Congress under Republican leadership. I doubt it. It's probably 4 to 6 months before Congress and the White House are at each other viciously. They have a falling out of irreconcilable differences. There's such a difference in style. Congress does not want to be told what to do. They do feel a little threatened right now, a little intimidated, and some people in Congress are going along with the president a little bit reluctantly, some eagerly, but certainly not a majority going along eagerly. You make a majority with those who are doing it eagerly and those who are doing it reluctantly or under duress. Those under duress just aren't going to stay there for more than a few months, I think. So it'll be, I predict, one person's prediction, so take it for what it's worth. I think there will be fireworks. Okay, now back to my question for you, which is, well, what should we be doing now as the science, engineering, technology community? Should we be playing along, trying to get a seat at the table in the White House? Should we be devoting all of our energy to advocating for good appropriation numbers on Capitol Hill? Should we be working with Rick Perry, who, by the way, does show an open mind on a lot of things, and the Secretary of Commerce? I actually think that we have an opportunity and an obligation to do something different than that, more basic than that, which is to reach out to society at large, to deal with what I mentioned in passing a few minutes ago, this ongoing erosion in the appreciation of science, this growing misunderstanding of what's so special about science, why it has value for society beyond its spin-offs, why it is the best, most time-tested way of avoiding deception, deception by others, self-deception, why evidence-based policy is better than ideology-based policy. And it seems that we have an opportunity to do that, because as this uncertainty grows with the new administration, the public awareness that was vague before. You know, I've heard for years people complaining that policy is being made without good attention to research-based evidence. But now people are saying, oh, this really makes a difference, doesn't it? That we used to talk about fact-free policy, but now we have baseless news, truly fraudulent news. We have the administration without any sense of embarrassment using a phrase like alternative facts. And the public is, I think, and there's a little polling, very, very sketchy so far, surveys, to show that there is a greater awareness that this should be dealt with. So, as this kind of convening society, AAAS, I'm here to ask you, what should we be doing? You know, one immediate debate has to do with this so-called science march. You may have noticed that at the Women's March, the day after President Trump's inauguration, science sprung up spontaneously. You probably saw some of the signs on internet sites. My favorite was a 10 or 12-year-old kid holding a sign that says, "What do we want? Evidence-based science. When do we want it? After peer review." And I could just imagine this kid saying, "Oh, Mom, do I have to carry this sign?" And then, you know, after the 50th selfie that somebody took with that sign, the kid was saying, "Hey, maybe I'm onto something here," right? So, I mean, that's this. So some young scientists have taken this apparent interest that was springing up spontaneously and are now running a spontaneous plan, and disorganized plan, I must say, to hold a public demonstration here in Washington on behalf of science. Now, a lot of the societies, I mean, I'll tell you, my leadership, my board and so forth, are split on this. There are a lot of societies that are saying, well, we should engage in this march. Others that are saying, oh, we'll have people carrying placards, "I hate Trump," and it'll be, just, you know, and there are a lot of other arguments that one could imagine against it. And yet, this is the first time in my career I've seen any spontaneous demonstration on behalf of the idea of science. You know, not against atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, or not against GMOs, or not against nuclear or for nuclear power, but a demonstration about science. I think that's an opportunity that's hard to pass up. But what do we do with it?